Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm back with Steve Durbin to talk about building a workforce for the future. Today, cyber is impacting everything from business strategy to regulation and compliance. There's a need for the security function to protect the organization from data breaches and hacks. These are the real issues every business is facing, and all roads seem to be leading to the CISO. Steve, with so many emerging threats, increasing sophistication of cyber criminals, and the constant fear of hefty penalties, what attributes should a CISO be looking for when building a team for the future?
I think it's a very good question, Tavia, particularly at the start of the year when, of course, many security functions are just looking at what their resourcing requirements are going to be and indeed really trying to understand how what they're doing can fit with an overall business strategy. The threat landscape continues to become more and more sophisticated. We're seeing, obviously, an increase in things like crime as a service, ransomware, malware is being very, very popular, spear phishing. All of these sorts of things are really becoming, I suppose, the bread and butter of the security department in terms of how do we keep them out? How do we educate our users? How do we make sure that we have the right skill sets in place, resources in place? And that doesn't just apply to the people. It applies to tooling. It applies to applications. And, of course, it also applies to working with the most appropriate partners, whether they be IT, whether they be within the organization. I'm thinking particularly of things like HR and so on. So in pulling together an overall team, I think that the CISO's job is really all-encompassing. He or she has to consider not just the individual people-based skills. That's challenging enough. We need to be looking at people, attracting people in who perhaps understand the business, not just understanding some of the technical components, although that's important as well. And it is about, for me anyway, trying to attract resources that have a fluency, a capability of communicating effectively, not just within the team, but also across the enterprise. So really, there are a number of different attributes. It is about having, I think, the right level of resource from the people side of things. It is about having alignment between what it is that you're trying to do within the security function and demonstrating clearly right the way across the business, from the board right the way down, how that relates to the objectives that the business has. So that alignment is very important. And then it's also about how you're going to deliver and how you're going to demonstrate that delivery in a way that, again, is understood by the business, because that will really determine how successful you can be in the coming 12, 18, 24 months. So a lot to do, really, in terms of pulling together the teams and the resources that are required. But as I say, the beginning of the year is always a good time to take stock on where you are and see how you should be going forward.
Do you think that it's best for CISOs to look at people who are specifically tasked with IT management, or should they be looking more widely across the enterprise to see what other kinds of talents might be supportive of their mission?
I think you need to take a much broader look than just IT. I mean, IT for me is one component of the overall security mix. And there are probably some people listening to this who think, well, I fit under a CIO, and clearly our organization is focused on having the right tools and applications and so on in place that can protect the organization. I think the reason that I'm saying that is that we are going to have to move very much more away from this notion of pure prevention. It isn't possible to prevent your organization from being attacked. If you happen to be a target, at some point, you will have a breach. You will be hacked. And so I think what we're going to be seeing is security departments having to focus very much more on identifying the critical assets within the enterprise, looking at how those can be protected, but perhaps more importantly, looking at how they're going to be able to recover from an attack. What are the remediation processes that they can put in place? And then eventually, we're going to have to look at trying to predict some of those potential attacks again so that we can put in place some very proactive approaches to either thwarting those attacks or indeed, if they get through, as I say, getting back up and running. Now, all of that, of course, isn't just confined to the IT space. You are going to have a fairly well-established playbook so that come the day when there is a breach or a hack, everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And that goes from the board right the way down through each and every employee within your organization, and it touches third parties. So if we look at it from that standpoint, then the CISO needs to be building out relationships across the enterprise. HR would be a good place to start, I think. Some of the business functions, marketing, for instance, because, of course, marketing is very good at helping you sell and position what it is that you're trying to do, and the business leaders. It's also about making sure that your third-party providers understand the security posture that you have, understand how you're expecting them to really handle your data, protect your data, ensure the integrity of data, and making sure that I think you have some regular touch points with them. Because, of course, an attack may not just come from your own organization, it could come via a third party. So again, a lot of different areas, I think, for security functions to be looking at, but not just confined to the enterprise itself.
According to the recent Global Information Security Workforce Study by Frost and Sullivan, there will be an insufficient number of people embarking on a career in cybersecurity. And I was surprised by this estimate that there will be a shortage of 1.8 million people by 2022, right around the corner. So how true do you think that statement is, and how should organizations plan to react?
Yeah, I mean, we are in an industry at the moment with zero unemployment. And, of course, that brings with it some very real challenges in terms of attraction and in terms of retention. And I think we have to get very much more imaginative from a security standpoint in terms of how we go about bringing in the right people and keeping them. I think that we have to be realistic. There are very few businesses, I think, that are going to be able to offer security folks in the future that total career, mainly because it's not what people are looking for. They want to come in, they want to upskill, and they want to move on to the next thing. So from a security standpoint, I think what we have to be doing is getting across the message that we are operating now in a very vibrant, demanding, intellectually stimulating environment. And that's very different from the way security was viewed just a few years ago. So that's the message. I think if we want to attract the right sort of people, we have to reposition ourselves in that way. The second component is that you don't necessarily need to have people coming into that function who just have security skills. Increasingly, security and cyber is so prevalent across the enterprise that there really is a need, if we're going to protect our information, for us to understand how the business is making use of it. So there is an opportunity, I think, for us to take perhaps people from other business functions, bring them into a security function for a while. There are benefits associated with that. First of all, security gets some insight into the way that the business is actually using tools and the information, and indeed benefits from the fact that it can understand better, perhaps, some of the shortfalls. I'm thinking in particular of some of the challenges that we've always faced in things like, security awareness, security training, the end user. And so this can go some way, I think, towards really turning that, what is perceived in some instances to be the weakest link, people, into perhaps the strongest link in the security chain. So I think that, to summarize, we need to be very specific about what we're looking for in terms of skill sets. We need to be demonstrating that we can contribute from a demanding, attractive, intellectually stimulating environment perspective. That there is an opportunity for people to learn, to upskill, which obviously puts them in very good stead if they want to move on, either within the organization or indeed outside. But we also have to be realistic about the fact that it is a very tough sell. We are competing not just within our own organization, but of course outside in, as I said earlier, a market where there is zero unemployment. And so we are going to have to, I think, really market ourselves much more effectively than we have done in the past. We're going to have to listen better, I think, to what it is that our buyers, our employees, are actually looking for. And we're going to have to change some of our management styles. And I don't think that we should underestimate the size of the challenge in that particular space.
It seems like this is a job that potentially has a lot of creativity involved in it, in a way that maybe businesses didn't recognize in the past.
I think that's right. And I think that it very much depends as well on the way in which the business views cyber. So there are some organizations out there that clearly have decided that cyber is core to the way in which they will go forward, the way in which they will grow, the way in which they'll deliver increased productivity or services or whatever it might be to their target markets. And I think those are starting to become some of the more interesting areas of opportunity, certainly from a security standpoint. But it's a very, very different space from the one that we saw, as I said, just a few years ago.
Interesting. When looking at ways to solve these staff shortages, could technology such as AI be of assistance?
I think there's a lot of hope being attached to things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, as a way of overcoming some of the skills shortages. And for me, I think that there is certainly a role for it to play. I don't think we're there yet. I think that the reality is that unless you happen to be a very large corporation that is able to spend significant amounts in that particular space, that it is very difficult to justify a return on the levels of investment that are required to have AI working effectively in these areas. So my advice to security organizations out there who are perhaps considering this is, if you're in an organization that has been spending on AI, maybe you do have a number of data scientists and so on that have been used in terms of putting together new products and services for your business, then look at how you can piggyback. Look at how you can work with them to really try to move some of that investment perhaps across into the security function and learn from some of their mistakes. I think there are also some interesting vendors out there who've been spending quite a lot of money in this particular space. Again, perhaps not so much in security at the moment, but well worth a look there too. I think it's an area that we will see developing, certainly over the coming years. It's not there yet from a security standpoint, but I do think that it has a role to play in that overall mix from a security resources standpoint.
Well, the need for a sustainable workforce is more important than ever, particularly in the information security function. Any shortfall in skills and capabilities can be laid bare by a major security incident that affects an organization's performance, reputation, and image. But as demand outstrips supply and organizations struggle to find the skilled people they need, a sustainable workforce is difficult to achieve and puts increasing pressure on the CISO. It seems to be time for a new approach in building a sustainable security workforce. For more information on these issues and others, as ever, please visit securityforum.org.